Greetings, I'm doing a presentation on CSS Combinators for the class of WDD 230. To begin with, a combinator is something that explains a relationship between two selectors. Now, in order to activate a combinator, they need a specific symbol. For example, descendant selectors have a space, child selectors have a greater than, adjacent sibling, a plus symbol, and general sibling have a selector symbol. Now, all of this is done to make it easier to manipulate your code. So, to explain in greater detail, a descendant combinator combines two selectors such that elements matched by the second selector are selected if they have an ancestor element matching the first selector. So to make this easier to understand, as you can see here, the div selector has descendants, which are the paragraph selector within it. So what you would do, you would say div element space p element background yellow. That space bar activates the descendant combinator, which is what allows all of these to be selected. Now, descendant selectors only select everything within the main element, which is the div, but it will leave everything that's outside the element, which is paragraph 4 and 5. Then we move on to child selectors. Oh, sorry, child combinators. These are usually placed between two CSS selectors. It matches only those elements matched by the second selector that are the direct children of elements matched by the first. Now, to explain this, as usual, we do div greater than p. Remember these symbols because if you ever mess up this, everything goes wrong. Now, as we said before, the div element is basic contains several paragraph elements. But in this instance, instead of a descendant selector, we're now choosing a child selector. This means that a child selector is, well, more selective than the descendant. Basically, here we've placed a section element. So because now we're doing a child selector, it only selects everything within that has a div identifier. Because this one has a section identifier, it will not be selected, even if it's located within the what can I say, the main element, which is the div. To put it into perspective, a descendant selector would be more general. It would pick everything. For example, if I say this div space p, then everything would pretty much be selected. It does not, everything within the div is selected. It does not discriminate. But the moment I put the greater than symbol, all of a sudden, the section element cannot be chosen because it's a completely different element. It's now a descendant. And as usual, anything that's outside the div element will not be selected. So the next combinator is now an adjacent sibling combinator. This is again placed between two CSS selectors. It matches only those elements matched by the second selector that are the next sibling element of the first selector. To show this in greater detail, we would write it as div plus p. This now this one is interesting because unlike the previous two, which would pick, say, everything within the div, uh, an adjacent sibling element only picks a specific element that comes right after the specific element. For example, the paragraph 3 has been selected because it's adjacent to the div over here. But paragraph 4 is not chosen because it comes right after paragraph P. Basically, adjacent sibling picks anything outside, the parameters, like the very first element that comes outside the parameters of a specific div and nothing else. Now, the next combinator is the general sibling combinator, which is very similar to an adjacent, but it is activated with a tilde sign and it selects all the elements that come anywhere after, the main element that has been chosen. For example, here we did div tilde p. Now, unlike the previous one, as I've mentioned, it doesn't select the it does not select just one element that comes after the div. Instead, it selects everything. So, with that being said, this one is more, what can I say? It basically, as we said, it picks everything that comes after, as opposed to the previous one, which only picks one element that comes after. I hope that makes sense. Now, these aren't the only combinators because, according to this, we also have a selector combinator, which is represented by a comma symbol. This comma symbol makes it easier to combine different selectors and to manipulate them all at the same time. As we can see here, the span and div are manipulated by, with the exact same rule sets, but sometimes with programming, you don't have time to, rewrite the same thing multiple times. So you can easily say span comma div and then place one border around it and, you're done. There's also a column combinator. This one, I'm not so sure what the symbols are called, but these column combinators basically make it much easier to manipulate sub elements within a column, but it seems to only be useful under columns and nothing else. Lastly, there's this namespace separator, which is activated by this symbol. I don't know what that is called. Uh, it seems to be able to manipulate anything with a unique code. For example, here we've placed this entire, what can I say, has a link, this entire statement within these a links as an example. So if you would want to affect it, you would have say, my namespace, whatever the symbol is, and then a, and then you can affect everything that's covered by this which would pretty much be this this and nothing else. So with that being said, these are all the CSS combinators, and each one basically makes it easier to manipulate your code, but they need to be used properly because if you do not, it will mess up your code or confuse you even further. With that being said, I sincerely hope that I've been able to teach you something new, and I bid you farewell.